The water in your body is just visiting. It was a thunderstorm a week ago. It will be the ocean soon enough. Most of your cells come and go like morning dew. We are more weather pattern than stone monument. Sunlight on mist. Summer lightning. Your choices outweigh your substance. Welcome back to the podcast. I am your host, Naomi, and this is Mosaic in Progress. Please check the show notes for content trigger warnings. That quote at the beginning of the episode was from Twitter, someone who has the handle @CryptoNature. I probably just really dated myself by calling it a handle. But it is a beautiful quote and a good way to start this episode, because today we're going to talk about witchcraft. I hear a lot of lamenting about the popularity of witchcraft today, both from the evangelical Christian community and the occult community. And for very different reasons, obviously, everyone seems to be upset that it has become popular. I think the popularity of it obviously can be attributed somewhat to the media and entertainment industries and a lot of the focus on witchcraft that has happened in the last few years. The last few decades, really. In the 90s we saw movies like The Craft and Practical Magic and things such as that. And I think it did, in a way, shape a generation. But I think it's deeper than that. I think that witchcraft is making this popular comeback because it is so accessible. Witchcraft is an empowering practice, an empowering belief system. I saw a quote recently that was attributed to Isabel Bird. It said, "A witch is someone who has dedicated her life to learning about the connections between things. She studies the different cycles and her place in them. She learns how to use the energy in herself and in the world to make changes. And most of all, she tries to make the world a better place for herself and other people." In contrast to religion, whatever religion it is, and this is not picking on Christianity, but any religion comes with sets of rules. You have to do this, you can't do this, this is required of you, this is how you should live, this is how you should act. Witchcraft as a practice, and paganism in general, as a general rule for most pagan cultures, invites you to view yourself as a small part of a whole. You are, of course, your own entity, but by that token, you are your own entity in the same way that a cell is its own entity within the greater organism of skin. And in viewing yourself as a small part of a large whole, nature, it invites you to work within that. How can you be the best part of that you can be? And how can you use that collective to better yourself? This is witchcraft. It is simply the acknowledgement that you are not a part of nature, but you are nature. And that is incredibly empowering for anyone raised in the patriarchal, misogynistic, trauma-riddled evangelical church. And so you see so many people, women especially, leaving the church and becoming witches. Why would they not? We were told our entire childhood and whatever part of our adult lives we may have spent in the church that we were nothing. We were powerless. We couldn't change ourselves. We were worthless. The only thing that made us good was God. And it was just because He was merciful, because we were slime and filth and worthless. And on top of that everyone in the church is told, we were also told that because we were born with certain genitalia, we weren't allowed to teach people. We weren't allowed to speak in public. We weren't allowed to run anything except our own individual houses for our husbands, but only under his much more intelligent direction. You cannot tell people that they are nothing over and over and over and over again and expect them to stay when another option is presented. And I know that anyone who still believes evangelical Christian doctrine, hearing that, will immediately label me a backslider and a rebel, willful, sinful, just wanting to follow my own desires. And in a way, that is true. But it is only true within the context that I wanted to follow truth. And the evangelical church does not have it. And a lot of people came to that conclusion. I think that Gardnerian Wicca made witchcraft accessible because it took ritualistic occultism that had been somewhat guarded and gatekept in a way for a long time, and it made it accessible. And Gardner took a lot from Aleister Crowley, and essentially Wicca is built on Crowley's back, but he gets no credit for it. Gardner, quite frankly, was a pervert who built a religion around his kinks, but he did it in such a way that made it seem he was empowering women, and he essentially created evangelical Christianity, but pagan. He borrowed from other people and other religions and other traditions and claimed it was his own. He created a very sexist hierarchy. It just empowers women instead of men, and created rules and a following that was so committed to those rules that they evangelized anyone practicing similar religions or practices and told them they were doing it wrong. That there was only one way to do it, and if you didn't do it that way, you were wrong. Also claims to be one of the oldest religions while being one of the newest religions. Yes, I'm getting on my Wicca soapbox. I could not talk about witchcraft without talking about Wicca and how it has changed witchcraft in the Western world. Witchcraft, for most of history, has been nothing more than the experienced use of energy. It is done with rituals and spells and different objects that are deemed to be sacred or powerful. But witchcraft can be very small and very mundane. It can be as simple as speaking your intentions in the morning. It can be as simple as a prayer. It can be as simple as putting on your lipstick in a way that makes you show up in the world the way that you want to show up in the world. Witchcraft is merely the ability to shift energy, to make yourself better, and to make the world better. There are many different ways to practice witchcraft. There are many different types of witchcraft. But I think the appeal for it and the popularity of it comes from the fact that we are living in a society that disenfranchises women, children, the poor, the middle class, anyone with any amount of color in their skin, anyone who is seen as different or other. And witchcraft comes from a tradition of being other and finding your power. Whether you are looking at druids in Ireland or voodoo and hoodoo in New Orleans in the South, the people who were enslaved practicing witchcraft behind closed doors, trying to make their lives in the world a better place in spite of their enslaved state. You look at any pagan culture, the Native Americans, or really anywhere that is labeled pagan, and you can see witchcraft was where they found their power. Witchcraft was where they changed their lives. And I see so much in the evangelical community witchcraft being labeled as satanic because they don't understand it. And a big part of that comes from a mentality within the church that says that anything not of God is satanic. It is of Satan. It is of the devil. And so if it is something powerful that's not God, that's not biblical, well, that means it's satanic. This becomes a mockery for the rest of the world to see that mentality, because Satanism is an actual religion. There are Luciferians, there's the Church of Satan, and to see something labeled as satanic, or for them to accuse witches of worshiping Satan, it's laughable for those who actually practice it. because it is so ignorant of what the actual practice is. I was a witch before I left the church. I called myself a Christian witch. My practice was very similar to voodoo without being voodoo. There was a lot of psalms as spells and praying with herbs and roots, and I am very much a root worker with religious overtones. I did not leave the church to become a witch. I was a witch before I ever left the church. And a lot of people who knew me at the time got that mixed up. I left the church because I could no longer be a part of that with any integrity and claim to be someone who followed truth. So, why does it matter? Why do people care so much that witchcraft is becoming popular? Why are people so up in arms over it? Well, for the church, the evangelical community, the reason they are so up in arms over it is because despite their preaching that they believe God will always win, they don't really believe that. If you talk to any of them, they are terrified every second of their lives that evil will take over the world and they will be snuffed out. There will be no more God anywhere. There will be no more churches anywhere. There will be no more Christians. They will have to go into hiding. They have the most paranoid persecution complex that could possibly be envisioned. They think that any other religion, any other belief system, any other thought process different from theirs is a threat to them. They think they will be wiped out. They think they will be forced into hiding. They think they will be killed. They think they will be drugged into the arena to fight lions. Because there is a history of Christian persecution, they hold on to that with salivating anticipation that one day it will happen to them too. And I say salivating anticipation because despite the fact that they say they don't want it, they do. I grew up in this. I lived in it through my adult life until my mid-20s. Well, honestly, not even until my mid-20s. Late 20s was when I started pulling away, and I didn't fully leave until I was in my 30s. They want to be persecuted. They want to be able to show that they did something. They think somehow it makes them better Christians, more valid. And it is almost fetish-like how, as a culture, they look forward to the day that they might be persecuted. They might be fired or ridiculed or ostracized. I have heard exactly one person from the pulpit preach that that Christians have easy lives. Exactly one. And he said, we think about what the early church went through and the persecution that they went through and the literal killing and torture that happened to them. And we like to pretend that we get persecuted, but what is persecution for us? Oh, I might not get a promotion at a job. Or maybe my coworkers don't invite me to things. That's it. And he said that. And I respected him so much to have the integrity to say that. And it made everyone in the congregation very uncomfortable because they like to think of themselves as persecuted. They like to think of the, quote, political warfare that happens in our country as something that personally affects them and they personally have to fight for. That's why you see so many of them getting on social media and just attacking anyone who thinks differently than them, because that's how they view it. They view it as warfare. They view themselves as soldiers. And so anything that is a threat to their religion, or they perceive it as a threat, they hate. I have heard the lament of so many of our youth being lost to this spirituality garbage. Well, maybe they're lost to the spirituality garbage because the spirituality garbage, as you call it, is something that is real and tangible and also full of love, which Christianity claims to be, but doesn't actually practice, except very few individuals on very small scales. I know a lot of people who are Christians, and I know some good people who are Christians. And I say some, because the majority of the people who I know who are Christians are not loving people. They are judgmental people. They are hateful people. They are people who ostracize anyone who thinks differently than them. And not in a, I'm going to protect my energy kind of way, in a, I don't like you, you're a leper, because you think differently than me and you believe differently than me, so get away from me. Even before I left the church, even before I started questioning my beliefs that led to leaving the church, I lamented to my mother how unloving the church was as a whole. How judgmental they were. How opposite of what Jesus called them to be they were. It is to the point that you cannot call it an extremist minority. Their culture is unloving and judgmental as a whole, the evangelical church. Now, that is not to say that every Christian is unloving and judgmental. I know some that aren't. But as a whole, as a culture, every church that I have been in, every single church that I have been in, is judgmental and unloving. They will love you to the point of getting you to change to be like them, and they think that means love. One of the passages in the Bible that stands out to me the most about Jesus is the story of Jesus and the rich young ruler. The rich man who came to him and said, "Hey, what do I have to do to get into heaven?" Jesus told him, "Keep the commandments, blah, blah, blah." Gave him a list. He's like, "I do that already, and I've done it since I was a kid." And it says, Jesus looked at him and loved him. Jesus, who was supposed to be God, who was all-knowing, looked at this man's heart and knew him and loved him. The next verse tells how this man would not give up his riches to get into heaven, because Jesus told him to sell all that he had, give it to the poor, and follow him. And he went away exceedingly sorrowful, because he had great riches. Jesus knew his heart before that happened, and he loved him. Jesus didn't tell him to go away. He went away on his own. I don't see that love in the church. I've never seen that love in the church. And again, I have no loving Christians. I don't see it in the church as a culture. There is not love without conformity. And a conditional love is not love. So why would the occult community then be upset over the popularity of witchcraft? I think a big part of it is the fact that the occult community has been judged and ostracized for generations. And I kind of liken it to the rise of emo culture. So emo culture came about in my early teens, and I was a goth teen. And if you're not familiar with the history of goth, just to kind of give a really Cliff's Note overview, goth was somewhat of an offshoot of UK punk culture, and it was very much a response to the fucked up shit in the world. And goth style was very much a statement to say, I am not normal. I don't want you to think I'm normal. I don't want to be associated with normal. I want you to know that I am not someone who fits in. I'm not someone who wants to fit in. It was purposely curated for shock value. And I remember being like 14 years old, maybe 13. And my parents still took the paper. And I always read the funny pages. And I picked up the funny page section, the lifestyle section. And on the front page of the lifestyle section was an article. And in big, bold letters, the headline, "Don't call them goths anymore. They're emo now." And my initial visceral reaction was, what the fuck? And I read the article, and it was talking about how when you see kids in black now, they're not goths, they're emos. And how emo culture was different than goth culture. And I was horrified, because I was not at all emo. I was very much goth, and I knew in that moment I was about to be labeled emo. And I am still to this day, and I still to this day have a visceral reaction of disgust whenever anyone calls me emo. Goth culture was about being different. It was about not wanting to be part of the status quo. It was about realizing that the world is fucked up, and I don't want to be a part of the fucked up part of it. I want to be different. I want to be the change. Emo culture was about having feelings and wanting attention about them. By the admission of most emo artists. And to compound that, I was mocked a lot during that time. I was made fun of by my sister, my peers, people who I considered friends who really weren't as I look back on it. And most of them, while not the most popular, were definitely more popular people. And as emo culture began to rise, they all became emo. They listened to the emo music. They did the emo swoop bang hairstyle. They wore 1,000 bracelets on their wrists. The eyeliner, all of the emo things. And I could see that it was something borrowed from goth culture, but made more aesthetic and popular. And it infuriated me. It infuriated me to see an alt culture thing suddenly become popular. I think it is a similar situation with the occult community hating the popularity of witchcraft, because the witchcraft that you see popular now is so aesthetic. It is beautiful pictures with crystals in indirect sunlight and tea and very aesthetically pleasing tarot cards or oracle cards and flowers and scented candles and salt baths, and it is Instagram curated. It honestly has very little to do with actual witchcraft. But it looks pretty. And I think the people who were occultists before witchcraft became popular are people who had to deal with being called Satanists at work, who were judged, who lost friends, who lost family, who were passed up for promotions, who dealt with what Christians would call persecution. And to see it now being mainstream without any of the work, because so much of popular witchcraft involves no work. There's no initiation, there's no shadow work, there's no getting really real about who you are, which is what witchcraft is. You cannot change yourself if you don't know yourself. You can't change the world if you don't know yourself. And shadow work, even without that name, has been a huge part of witchcraft and occult practices for centuries, millennia. It is in the myth of Inanna, which is older than most things. Modern witchcraft, popular witchcraft, does not involve that level of honesty and self-reflection. And I think that is where the pushback comes from the occult community, because it is popularizing something that has for a long time been considered evil, has been considered weird, and has been ostracized. And the occultists of the 80s and 90s, or even 70s, 60s, see that suddenly, this pretty white girl named Tiffany is calling herself a witch and posting rose quartz and lavender and sage she got off of Amazon next to her salt bath, and saying she's practicing witchcraft, which that can be witchcraft. But in isolation from the entire rest of what witchcraft is, it's just a really nice bath. I think that witchcraft becoming popular is both a good thing and a bad thing. I think that it is good that it is becoming safer for people to practice. I think anything that makes people safer from real harm is a good thing. But I think that it is sad to see the degradation and the normalizing of something that used to be considered sacred. In pagan communities, witches were revered as the keepers of wisdom, healers. And to see someone who doesn't even know themselves, let alone how to change or direct energy, claiming the title that used to be given to those with experience, that was stamped on the heads of those who dared to be different, and they were killed for it. I think it is a very sad thing. Witchcraft is a wonderful practice. It is also a path that comes with significant responsibility. It is not something that is entered into lightly. People have been killed because of it. People have been killed at the mere suggestion that they were practicing, whether they were or not. Everyone likes to talk about the Salem witch trials. Salem witch trials did not kill witches. It killed women who were different, who were thought to be weird. And men, too. I don't want to discount that there were men involved as well, but the majority of the people killed were women. And I find it's so disrespectful to those women and to real witches when people use that little hackneyed quote, "We are the granddaughters of the witches you couldn't burn." It wasn't witches who burned. It was women. Witchcraft, for better or worse, is a very popular thing now. Though not the actual practicing of it, the dabbling in it, the pretending to be a witch. I know plenty of people who buy books and tarot cards and oracle cards and crystals and candles and incense and have never practiced a single day in their life. Witchcraft is not an aesthetic, though it has been made out to be one. Witchcraft has always made people uncomfortable. Because you cannot be in the presence of a witch. You cannot practice witchcraft without knowing who you are, every ugly part of yourself. And if you don't accept it, it is not a path or a person who will stay with you for very long. Witchcraft is extremely empowering because in order to practice, to truly practice, you have to know yourself and accept yourself. I am who I am, every ugly and beautiful part of me, the dark and the light, the good and the bad. And without accepting that I am who I am, I cannot change who I am. And without knowing my place in the world, every good and bad part of me, I can't change anything in the world. Witchcraft is a beautiful thing. It is a wonderful and empowering practice, and it changes the world. Do not be fooled into thinking there are now witches at every corner. There are people who wish to be that powerful at every corner. It's funny to me. The entire time I was in the church, I heard people saying people didn't want to follow Christianity because they had to admit the bad things about themselves. They had to admit they were wrong, or that they were bad, or that there were things they didn't know or couldn't do. I never really saw anyone in the church really use that. Really know themselves, really change themselves. I have seen it with myself and with everyone who I know who practices witchcraft. The ability to alchemize energy. This is a little different from our usual topics, but I hope it has been beneficial to you. And I hope you'll join me next week on the podcast as we both continue to work on our mosaic in progress.